Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding. His church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
I'm Gabe Lyons. Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. And today we're talking about race, but we're talking about it from a little bit of a different perspective. We want to talk about what does it mean to have these conversations with our children. At this last summer's event, Race and Repair, I invited Trillia Newbell, who's an author of a new children's book called God's Very Good Idea, to talk with me a little bit about the idea of how do we talk to our children about race. We know in so many of our families, our children grow up and they see everyone as equal. They don't have these parameters and they don't have these boxes that as they get older, society starts to shape and starts to make them see people through different lenses. And so we wanted to talk to Trillia a little bit about her perspective on this. She's also authored several books, including Sacred Endurance, If God is For Us, and Fear and Faith. She's an incredible author. Her writings on issues of faith, family, and diversity have been published at Desiring God, Christianity Today, the Gospel Coalition, and more. But today you're going to get to hear our conversation from our Race and Repair event. And if you're a Q Media subscriber, you can actually watch it through your Q Media subscription, as well as many other talks that took place through that event. And I hope you'll enjoy that because this was in the context of helping us better understand how do we move this conversation forward in a positive direction. Trillia Newbell is with us, and she is somebody who has written several books, one called Fear and Faith, something I know a lot of us have responded to over these last few months, is do we respond to changing circumstances in fear or faith? She's also written a children's book, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment because this book is actually part of how we start at the youngest ages, helping our children better understand the story that we're living into. Trillia, thank you so much for being with us today. And here is that beautiful book, God's Very Good Idea. Now, I couldn't recommend this high enough. If you've been listening to this today, just go get this book. Amazon, anywhere you buy books, go get this book. It's an important book for us to start with our children, making sure they understand God's very good idea, a true story about God's delightfully different family. Trillia, what inspired you to write a children's book?
Well, I think partly having children, I am married to a white man, and so we're in an interracial marriage, and we have had to start really early teaching our children about race and diversity. I remember at the age of 2, my son saying something like, you are brown and daddy's peach. And so, peach, which is that's kids. They're trying to make sense of their world. And so I taught, it came from actually a Sunday school class that I taught at my church and quickly realized that there wasn't a lot of resources, so I had to make one up. Yeah. And the reaction from those kids, one particular saying something like, talking about my daughter, Sydney, she's not just my friend, she's my sister. And I thought, how many other people need this information at an early age? Well, we all do. Yeah. And so that was the heartbeat, is really just out of my own conviction.
Well, if racism and the idea of race is a learned social structure, we find in our children that they don't begin seeing the world that way. And as they start to grow up, they start to form into these labels and these buckets, and they start to orient around that. You believe it's so important that our parents talk to children, and not only our youngest children, but let's talk about our teenagers. I've got
Absolutely.
3 teenagers in our home and a elementary student. Yeah. But that sometimes parents don't, and we're talking about a lot of white parents here, okay? Yeah. I know non-white parents do have these conversations. It's just part of the necessity that they feel they have to do. But a lot of white parents are like, why would I talk about this? And part of this is the isolation problem. Part of this is not the engagement. And you talked about 3 misconceptions that parents tend to have about why they don't talk about racism. Will you talk about why some parents aren't doing this? And then let's move to why it's critical that they do it.
Yeah, before I even talk about the misconceptions, I want to start by saying some people don't talk about it because they're racist themselves.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is one of the things we have to ask ourselves. And you may not be racist. you may be apathetic.
Yeah.
You may be it's kind of see it as their problem, not my problem. And so we've got to ask ourselves, who's going to teach our kids? Will the culture or will we? And then we have to ask ourselves, where in our own hearts must we change? Because they do. It is learned in a lot of ways that, and so we have to repent ourselves of our biases, of our assumptions, of the evil that is in our own hearts before we can even teach our children.
Yeah.
So start with yourself, interrogating our own hearts, and then go to our kids. And one misconception, I think, is that it is a political issue.
Yeah.
It is a political issue. Policies, if we don't have changed policies, in the United States specifically, well, I wouldn't be sitting here, right? So we do need to address those policy issues, but it's also a biblical issue.
Yeah.
We see God created every person in his image. And we see that he's given us a beautiful multi-ethnic mission to go and make disciples of all nations. And as was already talked about, Ephesians 2, the veil of hostility has been broken down in the body of Jesus Christ. We will one day forever be worshiping together. We have a better word in the scriptures.
Yeah.
And so I want us to rescue it from the culture and rescue it from politics because we speak a better word, those who know Jesus. So political, we can think it's political, and it can hinder us from speaking to it. I think another thing is that we don't think our kids will understand. And as I've already mentioned, kids will understand. They will know. They see
They're not
differences.
as naive as we tend to hope that they are.
Not at all. And as a matter of fact, again, and I talked about this, who's going to be teaching our kids?
Yeah.
They're going to learn. So they're either going to learn on the street, they're going to learn in their classroom, they're going to learn somewhere. And so we want to be the ones that are educating and helping our kids to understand about culture and differences. And I don't remember the third one that I wrote, but
well, I think the point is there's a fear. I mean, you talk about the role of faith in our lives, and I think fear is the reason we would hold back from having honest conversations. We know from our data that in the church, many times our Christians sitting in pews feel like their pastors don't talk about the difficult issues, right? There's like a fear around moving into space where we don't have all the answers. Talk a little bit about why, as Christians, like we don't get the option to just back out of these conversations. Even if we don't know all the answers, how fruitful is it just to get into a conversation with your kids and maybe hear what they think? Yeah,
well, as Christians, we are a family, right? And we mourn with those who mourn, we weep with those who weep. So we want to, in order for us to love our neighbor as ourselves, we got to understand our neighbor. And so we can't fear these conversations. We've got to move into them and have them. Yeah. And so I think it's a sad detriment to the church if we are afraid of one another. Yeah. You cannot love someone who you are afraid of. Yeah. You can't. Yeah. And so I think part of it is just gaining understanding. And I think acknowledging when we lack understanding. Yeah. One of the best things that a friend has said to me is, I don't understand, but I love you. And I'm like, you're right. You don't understand, but I want to help you. Yeah, I want to help you understand. And so that, I think, is it transforms relationships. Yeah. It opens the opportunity to talk about these things, and with our kids. I tell friends that when you see your kid and they see someone in the grocery store who maybe looks a little different, and maybe they have a red dot on their forehead or something, and your kid points to that difference, and they're like, oh, "What is that, mommy?" Yeah. We are teaching our kids that difference is wrong if we respond in, stop. Yeah. Instead of saying, you know what, let's go and research this. Yeah. Let's go learn about this. Right. And so I think even the way we approach the unknown can transform the way we view one another. Yeah. And so that to me is something very important. Take away the fear. Yeah. There's nothing to be afraid of. Well, one of the misconceptions that you mentioned is that we're colorblind, and we think that's the idea that, I feel like that was a pervasive idea for several
decades, right?
Yeah.
That Christians are supposed to be colorblind. And I feel like there's a good amount of evidence and conversation now that people are going, wait, that is not the answer. Can you explain that, though, to people who might have thought, I'm supposed to just be colorblind. I'm not supposed to see skin color. Why is it important we see skin color?
Well, God has created me this way.
Yeah.
And so when you really reduce and try, in a lot of ways, erase me when you say that you don't see the way that God has created me.
Yeah.
Also, the truth is you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not going to really be able to engage in conversation about getting to know one another and culture if we pretend like we don't actually see our differences.
Yeah.
And we can celebrate them.
Mm-hmm.
We can celebrate God. I love it. I love reading the book of Revelation and how God doesn't erase that every tribe,
That's
tongue,
right.
and nation will be
Yeah.
worshiping together. He could have.
That's right.
He could have said, all those who have professed faith in Jesus will be worshiping. But no, he keeps those differences.
Right.
I think there's a reason for that. So why would we want to erase that?
Yeah.
So I really think that there's a lot of what people are really trying to say when they say that I'm colorblind is they're trying to say I'm not racist.
Right. But they don't understand. They're dismissing history.
They are dismissing.
They're not taking the time maybe to dig in. It's kind of an easy out, I guess, to not understand.
It is absolutely an easy out. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's an easy out. And instead, you want to, I've said and written that you want to be color smart.
Yeah.
You want
that's
to
good.
understand those who are not like you instead of trying to erase them.
Well, Trillia, I'm so grateful for your work on this for so many years faithfully. I hope you're encouraged about the opportunity that's here. I know there's a disappointment. There's also despair in some communities. We've talked about all that today. But I also hope that as you continue your good work for the many years ahead, that you feel encouragement that God's on you and anointed you for a time like this. And I hope everybody listening, I'm telling you, make sure you have this book on the nightstand, on the bookshelf for your children. But Trillia, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that was helpful for you. And I want to encourage you, if you have children, get this book, God's Very Good Idea. I just think you'll appreciate the conversations it can create as we try to establish in our children a gospel view of what it looks like to see one another as made in the image of God. I love how she described the book of Revelation, every tribe, not being erased, that we're all there worshiping together. It just gives us such a good vision for how to think about the future that we're living into in the kingdom. And then I also want to tell you, if you're a pastor or a church leader, come join us. Our newest Q event is taking place in just a few weeks. It's called Q&A. It's very limited. It's going to be intimate space. 300 of us maxed out because of just social distancing and all that needs to take place to do a live event these days. But we felt it was so important that we gather, that during a time, during the end of this year, during a season right after the election, where we know there's a lot of division, there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of confusion, that pastors coming together and church leaders to specifically have some time to really look at the year ahead, to pray together, to learn, to listen to how other people are thinking about everything from how we're doing discipleship through digital formats to the importance of prayer, all the way to going deeper into this race conversation and where it's going from here and how we can be a part of the solution, to discussions around mental health and suicide, censorship. We're going to be talking about so much of what's on the horizon for the American church. And you don't want to miss this. It's going to be an incredible opportunity for Q&A, tons of conversation with like-minded leaders, all in an intimate setting. So I hope you'll join us. You can learn more about it at qideas.org/QA. And when you go there, you'll see not only the presenters, you can also see more about the topics as well as some of the experiences our team's creating in this area. And it's going to be a wonderful time. I think it's going to be deeply encouraging for you, or if you're listening to this and your pastor needs some encouragement, let them know about this. And while there's still some space, let's go ahead and have them register so that they can be a part of this conversation. Go to qideas.org/QA.